be on my phone, but I can't be alone. Welcome to the modern way, trying to be somebody I'm not, but it's not what I want. Surely there's another way. All of the lights are chasing, now faded. All the cheap thrills were only time wasted. Tell me why society's playing tricks to find who I am. Surely there's another way. All of my best friends are sick of pretending. We want the truth. Nah, 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 so much is missing. So give us the real thing. I know it's you. Nah, 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 nah. Never want a stereotype to define who I am. You never knew me anyway. I'm over trying to find the next high, cause the high never lasts. I'ma go another way. All the cheap lights were only time wasted. All these cheap thrills were only time wasted. Tell me why society's playing tricks to find who I am. Surely there's another way. All of my best friends are sick of pretending. We want the truth. Nah, 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 so much is missing. So give us the real thing. I know it's you. Nah, 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 nah. Nah, 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 nah. All of my best friends are sick of pretending. We want the truth. Nah, 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 so much is missing. So give us the real thing. I know it's you. Nah, 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 nah. All of my best friends are sick of pretending. We want the truth. Nah, 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 so much is missing. So give us the real thing. I know it's you. I know it's you. You give life, you are love, you bring light to the darkness, you give hope, you restore every heart that is broken. Great are you, Lord. It's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise, pour out our praise. It's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise to you only. Great are you, Lord. You give life, you are love, you bring light to the darkness, you give hope, you restore every heart that is broken. Great are you, Lord. It's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise. We pour out our praise. It's your will shout your praise. Our hearts will cry, these bones will sing. Great are you, Lord. And all the earth will shout your praise. Our hearts will cry, these bones will sing. Great are you, Lord. All the earth will shout your praise. Our hearts will cry, these bones will sing. Great are you, Lord. It's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise. We pour out our praise. It's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise to you only. It's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise. We pour out our praise. It's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise to you only. Great are you, Lord. Oh.
Sometimes the devil sounds a lot like worry, treading a well-worn path into my soul. And it don't sound evil, no, but my head's burning, and I know. So if you can't hear me, I could use you right about now. You can't hear me, yeah, yeah, I could use some peace. Because the devil's working in my soul, and all I really wanna know is you can hear me. Yes, you can hear me. I believe that there is someone watching over me, and I believe that is enough. Cause I believe it. Oh, don't make it easy. 'Cause I need to know that you can hear me. So if you can't hear me, I could use you right about now. If you can't hear me, could you send some peace? Because the devil's walking in my soul, and all I really wanna know is you can hear me. Is it you can hear me? Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Because the devil's walking in my soul.
Hey, what's up, guys? Welcome to another week of Discovery Students Online. And we're so glad that you guys decided to join us again today. We're doing a new series, starting a new series today called Can You Hear Me Now? And we're talking about our relationship with God, but more so our communication relationship with God. Why is it so hard for us a lot of times to hear God, to hear His voice, to hear what God is saying? And a lot of times feeling like maybe God's frustrated because we're not hearing Him. How do we live within that tension? So we're going to talk about how do we hear God. We're going to talk about what do we do when it feels like God's being quiet, and what about those times that we ask for something and we don't get the answer that we wanted. Maybe we do get an answer, but it's not the one we wanted. So we want to jump into that starting this week. And before we go deeper, this is a struggle that I've had in my life, Tanner, and I'm sure it's the same with you. We've talked about that a little bit. But for me, I think about there was a season right after college when I came back, and I was here. It was about a year and a half long season where just nothing was going right. College was great. I had gotten my degree. Things were good. But then, I couldn't get a job. I was alone. I didn't have people in my corner. I felt like I lost all my friends, or they lived on the other side of the country from college. And I just felt like God was completely silent in that season. I couldn't hear God. I couldn't hear God's direction. I'm like, do you want me to be in Colorado, or do I need to go somewhere else to get a job? What do you want from me? And it was one of the most frustrating seasons because it just felt like I wasn't getting any answer from God. And when I look back now, I see my approach to God was just, I would come to him and just be like, hey, God, I need this, this, and this. And here's what I want, and I want this answer. Nothing? What the heck, right? So my approach to God was almost like a jukebox where it was like, I'm going to throw in some change, hit the number that I want, and get the answer, right? And so I didn't approach God well, but that didn't change the fact that it was really frustrating. And I just felt like God was completely silent, have you had any experiences like that in your life?
Yeah, all the time. I think the one that really stands out, and you know this because we went through that Wild at Heart group together, but there's that season of my life where I really struggled with depression, anxiety, and there's a lot of stuff that was happening at home, and there was some neglect there, some abuse there at moments, and from my stepfather, and what that kind of did is it put me in this place where I was just depressed. I had lots of anxiety and lots of stress because of that situation. And so I tried seeking God all the time. And I started to go to this youth group and actually gave my life to Jesus at that youth group. And that was an amazing moment. But, that stuff continued. And so I remember hearing at church all the time, pray, spend time with God. And I would. And I felt like I wouldn't hear anything. But my reaction to a lot of that and kind of where that pushed me is I just felt like God didn't like me. And so I just ended up stopping. I ended up stopped going to him because I would hear about all these students at church that were hearing all these incredible things from God, and I'm going through this, praying, hearing no answers. And I kind of felt like God was almost out to get me. And so it was just well, you know what? I'm not even going to talk to you if you don't want to talk back. And so it was a really dark season, and I just kind of was in a place where I just wanted to give up because I couldn't hear anything from God.
Yeah.
And so.
Totally. And I think that's super relatable. That's, like I said, that's something I've experienced, and I'm sure there's tons of students who have and probably are experiencing the same thing, especially in this season, right? In the midst of this season, I know I've said multiple times, what's going on? What are you doing, God? What's the purpose for this? And frankly, I don't really know what the purpose for this is, and I may never know, right? And so there's frustration when we feel like we can't hear God. And so we want to walk into that. We want to walk into what are some ways that we believe help us to hear God better in our lives. And so let's actually go ahead and I'd love to pray with you guys before we dive too deep into the message today. So Lord, would you just guide us on this journey as we seek to know you more, as we seek to hear your voice more? Would you give us the words to say? Would you give us wisdom in approaching this topic? Because Lord, we know it's different for everybody, and that you see everyone so uniquely. So just give us the words to say in this, Lord, and we pray this on your name. Amen.
Amen.
I can hear all the claps all over the place after the prayer. So we're going to start actually in Exodus chapter 33. So we're going way back to the beginning of the Bible. Exodus chapter 33. We're going to start in verse 7. Now, what was going on at this point in time is the Israelites had been freed from Egypt, and now they are in the wilderness. They're wandering in the wilderness, seeking the promised land that God has given to them. Well, oftentimes Moses goes out and he prays, but where does he pray? How does he hear from God? We're going to look at that in verses 7 through 11, show us one of these really cool instances and shows us how Moses was praying. So starting in verse 7, it says, "Now Moses used to take the tent and pitch it outside the camp, far off from the camp, and he called it the tent of meeting. And everyone who sought the Lord would go out to the tent of, and everyone who sought the Lord would go out to the tent of meeting, which was outside the camp. Whenever Moses went out to the tent, all the people would rise up, and each would stand at his tent door and watch Moses until he had gone into the tent. When Moses entered the tent, the pillar of cloud would descend and stand at the entrance of the tent, and the Lord would speak with Moses. And when all the people who saw the pillar of cloud standing at the entrance of the tent, all the people would rise up and worship, each at his own tent door. Thus the Lord used to speak to Moses face to face as a man speaks to his friend. When Moses turned again into the camp, his assistant Joshua, the son of Nun, a young man, would not depart from the tent. So I think this is what a lot of us crave and desire, right? Where it says, the Lord used to speak to Moses face to face as a man speaks to his friend, right? And I think that's what a lot of us are looking for when we're talking to God and when we're trying to hear from God. But what I think is actually the most significant piece of this is that there was a specific place that was designated to speaking to the Lord. You know, and now this was for all these people who were traveling, right? But there's some really important things I think we have to highlight here. Is one, it was a place that was by itself, right? It wasn't in the middle of where everybody else, it wasn't in the middle of all distractions. It said that they put this tent of meeting far outside the camp, right? It was away from distractions, away from all this place. It was silent there, right? And we actually see a similar example from Jesus. I'm going to look at Mark chapter 1, verse 35. And it says that rising very early in the morning, while it was still dark, he departed and went out to a desolate place. And there he prayed. This is talking about Jesus. Jesus woke up early. He went out while it was still dark to a desolate place, and that's where he prayed. Again, in Luke 5:16, it says that Jesus departed from all the people, and he went out and he prayed. You know, it's just interesting that these great examples of God speaking or even Jesus praying, the first thing that they do is they turn everything off, and they get away from all the distractions. You know, I know it's so easy in our world. I was trying to read this morning, and I heard cars outside. I heard someone driving down the street with their stereo blasting, right? And I was just like, man, it's so hard to get away from distractions, right? But what's amazing of these is that Moses sets up this physical place, right, where it's like, this is where I hear from God. And so that made me think, like, what if I had that? What if I were to have a specific place where I could just meet with God? You know, and so for me, it's two places. One, it's the mountains. So when I want to really hear from God, I'm going to go in the mountains by myself when there's nobody but me and God. And I'm going to sit, and that's, in that season, actually, that's where I really felt like I heard the voice of God and encouraged me in that. The other place is in my basement. I have like a little office, and there's a chair there, and that's where I sit and pray. It's like my spot with God, you know? I don't know, do you have any spots for you that you hear God?
No, for sure. I actually have three that, because I think it's good to have options too, Neil.
Totally.
Like to know if this place is a distraction right now, I can go to this place. And I think the three that I have is I like to go outdoors too, so taking hikes, and sometimes I'll set up a hammock and just chill and find a nice view. And so I love hiking and spending time in the wilderness and or rock climbing, that kind of stuff. The second is actually the MMA gym.
Yeah.
And so I used to train for a while, and I still go in every once in a while, and it's just a time to clear my head and just, I don't know what it is, but punching, kicking, all that kind of stuff, the bag,
Yep.
It just helps me kind of release and clear my thoughts and just really give those to God. And the other is I love stories. I'm just a huge story person, whether it's movies. I'm not the biggest reader in the world, but the books that I do read, they capture my attention, and I'll read the whole thing.
Yeah.
And so a lot of time too, I think when I'm at home, if it's a story setting, so I'll watch a movie and use that, but I'll watch a movie that I know has a good message behind it. And sometimes I even connect with God on that. But those are three separate places that I think I really just kind of get away. It's my alone time with me and God, and Yeah, I think it's really special because I think I hear from him the most in those like
Yeah.
alone moments.
Yeah.
For sure.
When I think what's really good about you saying that is showing that it doesn't always have to be a physical place.
Yeah.
It can be. So for me, and just in my personality, has to be a physical
Yeah.
place because that's where my mind's like, okay, this is our place. This is our place, God. Now we can talk. But sometimes it can just be a mental place you go to.
Yeah.
A different, whether it is the stories or it's the gym or it is, so for some people it is just working out or being physically active.
Yeah, for sure.
It can be more of a like even a mental state that you choose to be in, or you do something that puts you in that state, And so there's this. Not only is there a place, but then seeing at the end of the Exodus passage the fact that Moses would leave, but then Joshua, this guy, he would stay. And he just wanted and he needed to be in the presence of God. So to have that desire to just sit, to be present, to find this place that is rid of all distractions, because I think that's our biggest thing. Like, it's so easy for me to sit down, even in my chair, and want to pray, but then I have my phone sitting right here, right? And I can hear it buzzing, even if the sound's off. Or like I said, I can hear stuff outside, or I think about some work I have to do, and so I'm like, okay, I'm just going to do something real quick. Like, it's so easy for us to be distracted. And, so I think what Tanner and I really want you guys to know is that you're not alone, that you aren't the only ones who feel this, that we feel this too. And we actually invited one of our high school leaders, Tyler, in to share his story and share about a time in his life where it was actually really hard for him to hear from God. And so we'd like to show you his story right now.
I guess I got to give a little bit of backstory. But so I grew up in a really small town in a house that went to church. And so by the time I got out of high school, I wanted to go someplace big and blend in, because in a small town, everybody knows your business. So I decided to go to University of Wisconsin, and I went there. And the first weekend, I was just one of the crowd, blended in, went to some parties, and I thought it was going to be really fun, but it wasn't. And so surprisingly, I ran into a girl from my hometown, and she hooked me up with the student ministry, and I went kind of not interested, but I was like, she's nice, and she asked me to go, I'll go. And I actually, God really spoke to me there, and I got really involved with the ministry and started making my faith my own, and my relationship with Jesus was really became personal, and it kept growing and growing until I actually changed my major to a religious studies major, and I was just really excited about my faith and my relationship with Jesus, and everything seemed to be going really well for a while. But I went to a public university, and religious studies there is a lot different than a Bible study or going to church and hearing a message there. So it started to raise all these questions in me about what do we believe as a church? Why haven't I heard some of these things before? In school, we talked about a passage of the Bible that I had heard in church before, talking about X, Y, and Z. And in school, they'd say, this passage, Paul is talking about ABC. And it started to create these doubts in me of, all right, if this is in conflict with what I've heard before, which one's right? Is the church right with what I've heard there, or is it right what I'm hearing in school? And it created these doubts, and it started making me doubt bigger things, did we get it all wrong? As a church, have we just kind of become modern day Pharisees, where we kind of miss the point and we think we know what we're talking about? And it just started this seed of doubt in me that started to grow. I had this personal relationship with Jesus, and it was close feeling. But then during that time where I wasn't getting answers, it felt like God was this kind of all-powerful, distant observer of what was going on. And he wasn't interacting or playing an active role in my life. He was just kind of above all being disappointed in me. honestly. Like, and so I just felt like that kind of the like tiny little nothing, like yelling at this big massive like God, like, why are you not answering me? And he just felt really distant. One night in my rebellious stage, I went to this party and I showed up really late. Apparently some stuff had gone down before I got there, and there was a guy I knew, and he was really upset and really drunk, and he was gonna leave the party. And I knew he didn't live around there, so I knew he probably drove to the party. And this is Wisconsin in like January, so it was really cold. And I'm like, this guy's not gonna walk home because it's cold. And he's drunk, he's probably gonna try to drive. So I told him I would walk home with him to make sure he didn't do that. And there was this side street he was parked on, and I saw his car, and he got his keys out and unlocked the door, and I just went and jumped into his driver's seat because I didn't want him to drive. So I jumped into his driver's seat, I buckled in, like, I was like, all right, like, I hadn't been drinking, so I was like, let me drive you home. And he wouldn't let me drive him home. Like, you know, like giving him all these options of like, hey, like, let me drive you home, let's keep walking, let me call a cab, like, we'll do something, let's get you home because I'm not gonna let you drive. And he was already upset, and he just kept getting more upset. And finally, you know, we're sitting there and it's cold, and the door's open because we're talking, and he just punches me in the face. And like the door is open for his car, so he's standing between me and the door of the car, just swinging into the car at my face. So I had to like push him out of the way of the door, and I got the door closed. You know, like he didn't know what he was doing. He was like out of his mind, angry. And so I didn't fight back. All I tried to do was like protect myself and get out of the situation. And then I was good. I called a friend and I was like, hey, like I need help. Like, I don't know what you can do, but this is the situation. Like, come help me out.
Man, I think a lot of us can relate to what Tyler's talking about, and the doubts that he's having, the things that he's struggling with, and even hearing God, like that's things that I can absolutely relate with as well. And so, you know, we talked about in the first part, like, hey, it's so important to find a place, right? Because, you know, in a season of my life, it's just felt chaotic, right? And Tyler said the same thing. It's felt chaotic. There's no solidarity, or there's no nothing consistent in my walk with God. And so we talked about like what would it look like to find that place of prayer, your quiet place, whatever that is. But the next thing that I really want to bring up is that we have to let God be God. You know, for a lot of us, there's this very specific way that we want God to talk to us. Like, God, speak to me through a dream. God, show me this huge sign. Write something in the clouds, in the sky. Just say something audibly. You know, that first week that we were doing this quarantine service, we talked about the whisper of God and the value of that. But a lot of us have this very specific way that we want to hear God. I'm going to ask you, what do you think is maybe the funniest thing that you've asked for or kind of expected from God? It doesn't have to be funny, but what's kind of the, like, can you think of a moment?
No, I think back to high school, man. There's, I don't know, when you're in high school, like, you just want to date. Like, it's like, there's like this pressure to date. And I remember like, there's this girl in our youth group, and that was kind of the only reason I was showing up to youth group anyways, was this girl. And I remember like praying, like, okay, well, I got to pray anyways. That's what Christians do. And I just remember throwing prayers up, just get her to notice me. Like, and like we would talk, and like I would take every little thing as like, oh, that's God trying to make this happen for me.
Right.
And it never worked out, which I'm glad it didn't, because like now I'm getting married to Allison, which is dope. But yeah, it's just like one of those things where I look back at that and it's like, why was I even expecting that from God? Like, that's such a silly thing. Like, of course he's not just gonna be like, here, come together. And then another one is sports. Like, I never prayed, God help me perform well. It was always like, give us the win.
Right.
And it's like, well, God doesn't really care about football. Like, or he doesn't really care about the sport. Like, and so it's just kind of one of those things where it's like, we would lose, and I'd be like, dude, like you didn't give
Yeah,
us the win.
right.
Come on. So
here's my question for you. Have you ever broken up with a girl and said that God told you to do it?
yeah.
Oh man, I'm not judging because I have too.
No,
but
it was, and I look back at it, I was like, no, that was
Total
dumb.
excuse.
I just didn't want to be with her.
yeah, just making an excuse, using God as an excuse. Yeah, that's horrible. I feel the sports thing. Pray
Yep.
that all the time. Like, God, let us win. I'm like, what happens when you play someone else who prayed that too, right?
Yeah,
Like,
no.
God's like, I don't really care about the outcome of this
Do
game.
well.
Yeah, like it's just, it's, it seems ridiculous. Maybe when we talk about it,
Yeah.
but in the moment it doesn't, right?
For sure.
In the moment you're like, yeah, this is right, and there's this one specific way that I want to hear God or I want God to speak to me. When we look at the Bible and we look at how God speaks to people, it's so many different ways, right? Sometimes it's through dreams. Sometimes he speaks through other people. We have the prophets and we have other people that God speaks through. So sometimes it's through other people. He speaks through a burning bush to Moses, right? He shows himself as a cloud and a pillar of fire. And my favorite one, and if you guys didn't know this is actually in the Bible. My favorite one is when he actually uses a donkey. A donkey physically talks to this guy. Like, what would you do if a donkey started talking to
I'd
you?
take my clothes off and kick it in the face.
Why? Why would you take your clothes off?
I don't know. It's just the
Wow.
first thing I thought.
I don't understand, but we'll take it. Anyway, you take your clothes off first? That's so weird. Anyway, David. Never mind.
Very David reaction.
It is very David.
If you don't know what
anyway,
I mean, go look it up.
Yeah, go read your Bibles. Okay, so, but anyway, wow, that caught me off guard.
You're welcome.
Take off your clothes and kick it. But anyway, so he uses a donkey to talk to this guy. Like, guys, look this up. It really is a story in the Bible. And so when God shows all of these ways, he uses dreams, right, all this stuff. When he shows us that he can speak in all of these ways, right? Another one that we talked about the first week was just that whisper. That quiet whisper that is needed. We just need distractions to be gone, and we'll experience the whisper of God. There's a quote by Helen Keller, and I'm reading a book called Whisper right now, and he uses this quote, and then he says this afterwards. But it says, "The only thing worse than blindness is having sight but no vision." And then he says in his book, perhaps the same could be said of those who have hearing but don't really listen. And so that hit me hard because God has given us everything that we need in order to hear him.
Yeah.
Right? He's given us his word. He's given us his Holy Spirit that intercedes on our behalf so that we can speak to him and so that we can hear him. So we have this hearing. We have this spiritual hearing. But a lot of times we are choosing not to listen. And something else that he says that I just want to point out is, he says, if you want God to do something new, you can't keep doing the same old thing, right? In order for me to experience God in a new way, I had to change what I was doing. I had to start spending more time with him. I went up in the mountains. I'll never forget reading Psalm 13 in that season of my life.
Yeah.
And Psalm 13 just changed my life when I read it in the mountains, because I went and I spent time with God, and he just took me to that psalm, and I that's how God spoke to me. And that, like, seriously, that is like the turning point of my life at that point. A lot of times God uses people to speak to me. And so what we have to do is be open and allow God to speak to us how he wants to, not how we want him to. Like I said, for me, probably the biggest way that God speaks to me is through other people. I have 3 mentors, and they say things all the time where I'm like, man, that was God. Like, God, like that, I needed that. And a lot of times, it's more, hey, you need to be doing this differently or better, right?
Yeah.
It's the things that I don't want to hear, but I need it. What are the ways that God speaks to you that you've learned?
I think the biggest one is mentors as well. I've noticed that when I don't have those people in my life that I know that I trust and can go to, but not just to tell me like what I want to hear, but like you were saying, to tell me maybe what I don't want to hear, but it's going to help me grow. I mean, I hear through those people like so much. God speaks to those people. The other one is like with those places that we were talking about, like I think it's really easy for me to, when I go to that place and it's me and God, to be the one talking all the time and to be the one like sharing my opinion
Yep.
instead of being silent. I think I have to really focus in on being silent and trying to listen. It's just
Yep.
like with what you're saying, like
Totally.
with that quote. And because a lot of time I'll just talk and I'll be like, okay, God, I can't hear from you, but it's because I took the whole time up, like,
Right.
you know.
Totally.
So I think those are the two main ways for sure.
Yep, I think that's great, and just pinpointing that, taking time to stop talking and to listen.
Yeah.
Right, to listen and not to just have to have all the words to say. So, we want to show you the rest of actually Tyler's story. He hung out a little bit longer and just showed how God did end up showing up in his life, in his story, and what it looked like when he finally felt like God answered him.
So, long story short, with him, like, we got the guy home, and I had taken a bunch of punches to the face as I was trying to close the door of the car. And so I walked home, like, just face all beaten up, swollen, bloody, and like, got to my house or my apartment, and I sat on the couch and I was like, what a night, you know, like, this is just weird. And like, in that moment, I heard God, like, speak to me, and it made me realize all the stuff that I had been doing to God, and like the state of rebellion, and not listening to him. Like, every time I went out to party, every time I, you know, like, was rebelling against him, I was basically hitting him in the face. And as like a, why are you not telling me what I need to know kind of thing, or why are you not listening to me? Like, why can't I hear you? And all that was just a slap in the face of God, and like, he still forgave me. Just like, in that moment, I was stuck in that car getting punched. Like, I didn't feel any anger. It was just me trying to, like, help this guy get home safely. That guy who was drunk out of his mind, who couldn't think straight, hitting me, was the same as me rebelling against God and like doing all these acts of rebellion, even though God has just been there the whole time for me. And like, he was there. He wasn't this distant, far off being. Like, he was next to me this whole time through all of it, trying to get me home safely. And I was just being rebellious and hitting him in the face. And so like, I never got this straight, like, oh yes, like, look at verse this and all your questions will be answered. Kind of like word from God, but in that moment it was kind of like God saying, like, listen, I died for you despite like all this stuff that you've done, and just hold on to that, like, have faith in that even though you're hitting me in the face, you're crucifying me, like, I died for you because of my love for you. And like, have faith in that love, that it will get you to eternal life and to a better life with God. And that was my answer.
Well, praise Jesus. That's amazing. Just Tyler's story all around is incredible. He, for those of you who don't know, he volunteers with us. So he helps out with our ministry every Wednesday night when we're here normally. But we just hope you guys are encouraged by it. And just to recap a little bit, what would it look like if, as we go on this journey together for the next couple weeks, 3-4 weeks, to start with these two things. Just start with, go find a place that can be for you and God. It could be your closet, it could be your room, it could be outside, wherever it is. Somewhere that's just for you and God. And then once you find that place, what would it look like if you just gave God permission to just say, God, just speak, however you want. And here I am, just speak, right? So that's our challenge for you guys. Tanner, do you have anything else that you want to add?
Yeah, dude, after listening to Tyler's story and then just talking about this, I was actually, like, camp popped up into my head. And I think many of us that have been to camp and hanging out at camp, like, we've had incredible experiences. And when I kind of think about camp, there's really nothing special to camp at all. Like, yeah, there's cool videos and stuff, but the reason camp, I think, is so powerful is because we give God the time that he deserves. And so I think when we go to these places, like, I think that's such a good reminder is camp's great because we get rid of distractions and we give God that time. And so what would it look like if we did that in our everyday life? Like, we had set moments where we got rid of distractions and we gave him the time that he deserves. Because I think just like Tyler's story, we're going to see that, you know, God does show up and he does speak and he is listening to us.
Yep.
And so that's just kind of the last thing that I was thinking of. But yeah.
Yeah, no, that's great. So we're going to jump into one last song, guys. And so we hope you enjoy it. But during this song, please spend this time with Jesus and commit to doing something different this week in order to hear God's voice.
Let the King of my heart be the mountain where I run, the fountain I drink from. Oh, he is my song. Let the King of my heart be the shadow where I hide, the ransom for my life. Oh, he is my song. And you are good. You're good. Oh, 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 let the King of my heart be the wind inside my sails, the anchor in the waves. Oh, he is my song. And let the King of my heart be the fire inside my days, the anchor in the waves. Oh, he is my song. You are good. You're good. Oh, you are good. You're good. Oh, you are good. You're good. Oh, you are good. You're good. Oh.
You're never gonna let me down. 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 You are good. You're good. Oh, you are good. You're good. Whoa, you are good. You're good. Oh, you are good. You're good. Whoa, you are good. You're never gonna let me down. You are good. You're never
Awesome. So thank you guys again for being here. Hey, just a reminder is like every week, we're going to hop on Zoom after this. And so if you have any questions or there's anything that you need prayer for, please hop on there. We're going to have some really good discussion. Last week was awesome. We had some great discussion. And so we're looking forward to doing that again, but we'd love for you guys to be a part of that. So what do you got for middle school?
Okay, middle school. So right after this, just like Andrew said, we're doing Zoom. So invite your friends. Remember, if we get over 30, we're going to wax my armpit. So it's going to be awful. So invite your friends. Start texting them now. Send them the link. I know I don't want that to happen. I want your friends to tune in, but I don't want to do that. But I'm sure you guys do. So go ahead, get them tuned in. But the big announcement is this Friday. This Friday, we are doing an all-nighter. So we're going to be on Zoom at 9 p.m. We're going to start it. We're going to stay up all night. We're going to have games. We're going to watch a movie, all that kind of stuff till 6 in the morning. So make sure you guys tune in for that. Ask us, DM us for the link throughout the week, and we'll have that all-nighter on Friday night. So we'll see you guys there.
Awesome. Love you guys. See you next week.
Defender of the weak, and you're the healer of the broken, and you are love, love, love. And with all that I am and all that I have, I bring you my worship, honest and true, and may the words of my mouth and the song of my heart be a reflection of who you are. You are friend to the outcast. You comfort those who are in need. And you became like us in all things. For you are love, love, love. And with all that I am and all that I have, I bring you my worship, honest words of my mouth and the song of my heart.